Hi. One of the great mysteries of languages is how native speakers of language often know instinctively really difficult bits of grammar, kind of instinctively, innately. We know those things. It's probably the same in every language. And yet, other much simpler grammatical rules native speakers get wrong. Why are there some really difficult things, really difficult grammar that native speakers just know and would never make the mistake? And other simpler things they don't know instinctively. That's a mystery. And one of those in English is quite interesting, is the difference between, and sounds very complicated grammatical thing, is the difference between transitive and intransitive verbs. Every single native speaker knows perfectly. It's nothing to do with education or learning. Every single native speaker of English knows instinctively when a verb is transitive and when a verb is intransitive, and they never, ever make a mistake. Learners of English, on the other hand, make these mistakes all the time. That's one of the big differences between native speakers of English and people who are learning English. So what do I mean by transitive and intransitive? Well, the explanation sounds a little bit complicated too, which again is amazing how native speakers know all of this. They don't know that they know it, but they do. So a transitive verb is, the complicated grammatical explanation is this. A transitive verb is a verb which takes a direct object. It may take more than one object. An intransitive verb does not take a direct object. What do I mean by a direct object? Okay, I like ice cream. I is the subject of the sentence, and ice cream is the object of the sentence. And the verb like is a transitive verb. It must have an object after it. And lots of learners of English, it's a typical mistake of beginners or lower level. Sometimes I even hear higher level people make this mistake. The word like must have an object. Every single native speaker knows that. No native speaker would ever say, I like or I don't like. It must be followed by an object. It must be something. I like ice cream, or even just, I like it. I like them. In Polish, for example, and a lot of other languages, it's not transitive. You can say lubię. Do you like ice cream? Lubię. I like. In English, no native speaker would ever do that. Doesn't matter how educated they are, because instinctively, every single native speaker knows that the verb like is a transitive verb and needs an object. So like must always be followed by an object. I like it, I like them, they like us, I like ice cream, etc. Want is another word that's exactly the same. Want is a transitive verb. It must have an object. You can't say I want. In Polish and other languages you can. Chcę, I want. In English you can't. You must say what, or there must be an object after it. I want it. I want them. I want some ice cream. I want something. It must be followed by an object. So that's a very common mistake where native speakers feel it's a transitive verb and people who learn don't. They have to learn this. So an example of intransitive verbs, which native speakers feel immediately should not be followed by a direct object, but learners of English get wrong very often, so it's the other way around, is an example of the word exercise. So exercise cannot be followed by, in the meaning of practicing, cannot be followed by a direct object. So you can't exercise football or exercise the piano. You can practice football, you can practice the piano, you can practice English, but you can't exercise English, because the word exercise in that meaning is intransitive. It does not take a direct object, and no native speaker, nothing to do with education or anything like that, would ever get that wrong. We feel innately, all of us, that exercise cannot be followed by a direct object. So I exercise regularly, that's okay. I exercise every day. I like exercising, but you can't follow it with the direct object. Practice, on the other hand, is transitive. I practice my English, I practice football, practice, sports, piano, whatever, because that's transitive. All right, so there's an example of some common mistakes that mix up. But the title of this video is... Oh no, sorry, I've got another one I wanted to mention, a very common mistake that's intransitive in English, but is used by students very often transitively, is the word to sightsee. That's a very common mistake. It's intransitive. You cannot sightsee something in English. You can visit something or see something. When we went to Paris, we visited the Eiffel Tower. We saw the Eiffel Tower, but you can't sightsee the Eiffel Tower. Why? Because sightsee is an intransitive verb. It cannot take an object. You can go sightseeing, you can like sightseeing, but you can't sightsee something. If you want to say that you visited somewhere or saw somewhere, you have to use words like see and visit, etc. No native speaker would ever get that wrong. It's very hard for students. Native speakers know innately, instinctively, that sightsee is an intransitive verb. They don't know they know it, but they do. All right, so let's go. So the title of this video is Tell versus Say, and this is in my top 5 of common mistakes that learners of English make. It's a common word, words tell or say. I made the mistake then of just saying it's a common word, because although they're completely different in English, tell and say don't even have the same letters. They are actually the same word. In Polish, for example, and a lot of other languages, tell and say is just one verb. In Polish, it's powiedzieć. It's the same verb because it means the same thing. Why do we have 2 different words in English, tell and say? Some people say tell is a little bit stronger than say. I'm not sure about that. The biggest difference anyway is tell is very strongly transitive. It must be followed by a direct object. And say is strongly intransitive. It cannot be followed by a direct object. Every single native speaker knows this, would never make this mistake, and yet it's in the top 5 of common mistakes that learners of English make. So what do I mean by that? Let me give you some examples. I told her she is beautiful. That's a correct sentence. But look, I used a direct object. I told her she is beautiful. Now I could say that sentence using the word say, because they're the same verb, but say is never followed by a direct object. So I said she is beautiful. I told her she is beautiful. Tell must be followed by a direct object. No exceptions. The direct object is usually the person. Tell me, tell you, tell them, tell the boss, tell the world. Or there are a few other direct objects, 4 or 5. Tell a story, tell a lie, tell the truth, tell a joke, tell the time. They're 5 most common ones that go with tell, but they're a direct object too. Tell must be followed. You cannot say, I told she is beautiful. That's wrong. I told her she is beautiful. And top 5 common mistakes, students don't realise this. Native speakers would never ever make that mistake. And the same with say. Say is not followed by a direct object. You cannot say somebody. You can say something to somebody. To somebody is not a direct object, it's a phrase. So there are 3 ways of saying the same sentence with tell and say. You can use just tell with a direct object. I told her she is beautiful. You can use say without any object. I said she is beautiful. Or you can say to someone, I said to her she is beautiful. So she told me she loves me. She said she loves me. She said to me she loves me. He said he is tired. He told me he is tired. He said to me that he is tired. So said is not followed by a direct object. Tell is. And every single native speaker gets that correct. It doesn't matter about their education or how much learning they've had, or they don't even think about it. It's something that we feel. And the amazing thing is, we know instinctively which verbs, all those, how many verbs in English? There must be millions. of verbs in English. Literally, millions. And yet, every single native speaker knows that verb is transitive, that verb is intransitive. And they even know what that means. Transitive means it must have a direct object. Intransitive means that it can't. And new learners of English, unfortunately, you have to learn that difference. But if you only do one thing, remember the verbs that I've mentioned today. Tell and say. Tell must be followed by who, usually you've told me, told her. Say is just say that, say something. Want and like must be followed by a direct object. They're the same as tell, the transitive. I like it, I want it. And sightsee and exercise are not followed by direct objects. You sightsee, but you don't sightsee something. You exercise, but you don't exercise something. If you remember those, then even just those 6 words that I mentioned, you will immediately stop making the most common mistakes that learners of English make, and your English will sound much more natural and much less foreign. Thanks.